review Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's a neurodiversity, disability, and what it means to experience the world from the perspective of autism. He is autistic self-advocate and tech lead, no other than Mr. Shea Belsky.
Daniel, thank you so much for having me. I'm hyped to talk about the books and literature that have shaped my journey as an autistic self advocate.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Shea, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Absolutely. So, my name is Shea Belsky. I am an autistic self advocate. I live just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and I currently work as a software engineering tech lead, having also come from a couple of different startups. I've worked for pretty big tech companies in my past, and along the way, have been really passionate about communicating and advocating for autistic people, neurodivergent individuals, and anyone with disability pretty broadly. It's not something that gets talked about nearly often enough, and I am lucky and fortunate to be able to do what I do and talk about what I talk about.
How does the neurodiversity paradigm fundamentally challenge society's concept of a normal brain or way of being?
Neurodiversity is something that describes a broad swath of people, including people who are autistic, like me. If you have ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, it also includes people who have things like anxiety, depression, OCD. It refers to the different ways in which people experience the world, that they perceive the world through their senses, through information. And it is a neurochemical difference, basically, that says my brain works differently, it functions differently than yours does. And not all neurodivergent people explicitly have a disability or think that they have a disability. It is a personal identification as far as people saying if they are disabled and neurodivergent. Some people say, I am disabled and neurodivergent, and some people don't see it that way. In my situation, I would say that I definitely have a disability with the sensory and social lens, but for other people, they may not have those same concerns. It is really different based on the individual and based on the person because no two neurodivergent people are exactly the same.
Very well said, Mr. Z. Very well said. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. How do you navigate the use of terms like disability, disorder, or difference and neurodivergence when describing autism?
Sorry about that. I think for neurodivergent people, and especially for autistic people, no two autistic people are exactly the same. There's a term that I am extremely fond of, which says that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. I am an autistic person who happens to be good at communicating, at speaking, at most social situations. And that is something that I think that I'm good at. But not every autistic person is super good at these things. Some folks struggle to communicate. Some folks are nonverbal. Other people may struggle in social situations. Some people have a much harder time being able to function with day-to-day tasks I take for granted. I can drive a car, get on the bus, I can tie my own shoes, I can cook in a kitchen with an oven with a stove. And for some people, they can't do some or any of those things. And so the experience of autistic people strongly varies from person to person. That's why I was saying before that for some people, their being autistic is much more of a disability than it is for others. And how to identify with a disability really varies from person to person. I would say that me being in a kitchen, I did not experience a disability, but for other people, they may not be able to do those sorts of things.
Mr. Shi, can you explain the double empathy problem and how it reframes misunderstandings between autistic and non autistic people?
When I think about double empathy, it comes down to, oh, like I know somebody who's autistic, therefore their problems must be the same as your problems. And as I mentioned before, no two autistic people are exactly the same. And what that means is that if I let's say I'm neurotypical and I just happen to know somebody who's autistic, or I've seen them in a book, I've seen them on a movie, whatever, and then I come across somebody else who's autistic, they could have two very different personalities, two different experiences, and you would try to equate them. You try to say, oh, like because I know of this one person, then this other person who is also autistic must behave very similarly. And that could not be far from the case as far as being like one of those 100% always true scenarios. These two people can have very different experiences, very different personalities. And to be honest with you, I have encountered that a lot. People are like, oh, you don't look autistic because you don't behave like this person I know very well, or you don't behave like this person I saw on TV the other day. And that becomes a problem for me when I'm trying to create understanding, create empathy, because some folks can't get it out of their heads that autism has different looks and different forms and functions for some people than it does for others.
Why is it shifting from purely medical view of autism, focusing on deficit, to a social or neurodiversity affirming model so crucial for well-being and inclusion?
This goes back to the idea that not every autistic person explicitly has a disability. Some autistic people do not have obvious or visible disabilities. If you were to look at a picture of me, you would not assume that I have any disability. You are making an assumption based on how I look. But if you put me in a stressful situation, if you put me in a scenario where my senses are dysregulated, if I'm in a socially challenging situation, then my disability becomes more apparent. And so what happens is like, well, do you actually have disability or not? When you think about autistic people, it is often, but not always, the case that autistic people are only viewed from a deficit based lens. They are only viewed based on what they cannot do, what they struggle with, and what they have a problem doing. And rarer is it that they are viewed for their strengths, for the things that they are really good at. I happen to be really good at communicating. I happen to be really good at, I have good hearing. I happen to be really strong at creating understanding between people, to like breaking down emotional barriers and digging really deep into relationships. And that is a strength of mine. And that often gets overlooked because my being autistic is often perceived by others to be a disability. And when you think about a deficit based model, the reality is that autistic people do have challenges and do have strengths, but they also possess talent. They possess really powerful strengths. I don't want to use the word superpower, but they possess attributes and they possess powers that are really a cut above the rest, I would say. But in order to achieve that higher, more focused state of being where they're higher performing, their needs had to be met. They have to be able to thrive in a situation that might otherwise be stressful for them.
Mr. Shea, how might difference in information processing, pattern recognition, or attention be core strength and present challenges in neurotypical design world?
When I think about processing information, I get kept bombarded by websites, by books, by living in a world where things can be very dense, or with social nuances or cliches or metaphors that I don't get. I often find myself having to ask people to clarify or define certain metaphors that I might not be getting. Like, they'll make an analogy about something, and I'll be like, "Can you explain what that analogy means? Because I have no idea what you're referring to here. I may have like heard about it for the first time, and I'll be like, wow, like I've never heard of this like expression being used this way." Like until I would say a few years ago, I didn't know what it meant to gaslight somebody. That's not even a metaphor. I was just like, these words don't make sense to me, and my brain is having a hard time figuring out like what does it mean to gaslight somebody. It felt like such a strange term for me. I had to learn that, and I'm like, oh, when you say gaslighting somebody, you mean you're putting words in their mouth, and even that's another metaphor that I still had to understand a little bit. I granted I knew what it meant to put words in my mouth before I knew what gaslighting meant, but even still, there's just lots of expressions that I've had to learn kind of artificially that have made my life quite interesting as far as it coming into them and not fully having my brain grasp what they mean.
Mr. Shea, how do varied autistic communication styles like directness or reliance on AAC, difference in nonverbal cues and scripting, reflect? valid ways of connecting.
I had the great pleasure of meeting a few people who are non-speaking, and I have been extremely impressed about how much work and effort it takes for them to communicate in a world that is largely built on verbal communication. There's an organization in the Boston area called the League School, which is a educational institution focused on supporting the needs of autistic people who have tend to have higher support needs. And a lot of the students that are there are non-speakers. They rely on a tablet like an iPad or an Android tablet to be able to communicate. They will type what they want to say, they'll have icons or emojis, and that is how they project their thoughts or voices out into the world. And most people aren't used to that or prepared for that. And a lot of these folks often have other comorbidities or they have other disabilities, which makes communicating with them a little bit complicated. And then there's other types of non-speakers who have functionally no other disability or no other obvious appearance of having one, other than the fact that they are nonverbal and cannot communicate the way that we are now. Not that they don't want to, but that they can't. And for these folks, they are extremely articulate. They are very well put together, and what they have to say, they make every word count. They There's no ahs, there's no ums, there's no likes. They say exactly what they need to say, and it's powerful and it lands. And I wish that I was even a fraction of the speaker and communicator that these non-speakers are, because I think if I could communicate and be much more thoughtful and attentive to my words the way that they are, I would be a stronger communicator. And so I look up to them in that regard.
Very well said, Mr. Shui. Very well said. Beautifully articulated. What is autistic masking or camouflaging, and what are the significant mental, emotional, and physical tolls of constantly trying to appear neurotypical?
Masking, you could think about it in a way that's like from a drama or from a show where you are trying to act or behave in a different way based on what somebody expects you to do or expects you to say. When I say that I am masking, I'm like, oh, I know in this situation I am expected to behave more formally. I'm expected to ask these questions. I'm expected to say these things. I have to be prepared for people to ask me these things. Say I'm at like a business networking event. Have to mask at those events often to say, okay, when I talk to somebody at these events, I have to say, hey, how are you? My name is Shay. This is where I work. Da 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 da. You want to I have to give the appearance of caring about them and being very personal, even if that feels very artificial to me. It's not like an emotion that I think comes naturally to me to want to care about strangers to get something out of them in a way that's transactional. I feel differently about people in my life who I love and I care for. But when it comes down to strangers in an event, I have to mask in order to get what I want. And I recognize that it is a process of masking and it often varies as far as how successful that I am. But I'm aware of the fact that I have to do it and sort of artificially construct my personality based on what they think I need to do.
Totally agree with you, Mr. Che. And how do you reconcile or integrate the identity of being autistic with the concept of disability?
Not all autistic people themselves identify as having disability. Some autistic people are only disabled with heavy air quotes in certain scenarios. That does not mean that they suddenly stop being disabled forever. You can't necessarily be cured of your autism. There's been so many articles in the past where it's like, oh, this person was cured of being autistic or Asperger's or whatever we're calling it. And I really have a hard time understanding why people perceive it that way, why that sort of stuff gets into written text to get it into television and technology. Like autism is not a thing that is cured, and most disabilities that affect people for their entire lives cannot be cured in any way. It's not like it's not like a common cold that goes away generally. Autism is something that affects people at different points in their lives in different scenarios. And for me, I know for a fact that most of the time I do not experience my being autistic as a disability, but there's a significant portion of my life where I do experience a disability. And I do have to manage that and I have to understand and reflect how is this going to affect my ability to do something and what can I do about it? And how can I manage? How can I communicate with people around me? And what's the point of it all?
Mr. Shea, as autistic self-advocate, what are your short-term and long-term goals?
My short-term goals, within the next year, I am hoping to run the Boston Marathon. Ideally, I am working with the Doug Flutie Foundation, an organization based in Boston, who is a strong proponent and strong advocate for autistic people and their families. And they have a program of adaptive athletes who run with them and raise money for charity. And they run to create awareness and acceptance and inclusion for autistic people. So within the next year, my plan is to run the Boston Marathon for the Doug Flutie Foundation and really 10x the amount of advocacy that I'm doing for them. And in the long term goal, it is to really become much more specialized and much more focused in my advocacy for autistic people, not just focusing on things that are more general, but on my business experience, my leadership, and how I can apply that in the right ways and more thoughtful ways. And I think I love running my own show. I love running my own podcast. I host a podcast called Autistic Techie. I would love to grow that in the long term too. We talk about neurodiversity in tech industries and big work careers. I would love to grow that in the long term too.
Good luck to your goals, Mr. Shea, and looking forward for more success. What would be your piece of advice for those people out there that want to help autistic people out there?
My number one advice is don't make assumptions about autistic people just based on how they look or what they say. Seek to talk to them, to understand and have a conversation, and really create a dialogue. That is how you're going to most meaningfully and effectively support them.
Yes, indeed. Let's support autistic people all over the world. And can you recommend a book that influenced your journey, Mr. Shea?
Absolutely. I have this book. This is a more recent book called We're Not Broken: Changing the Autism Conversation by Eric Garcia. He is a reporter for MSNBC, and he is also an autistic self advocate. He's in the news often reporting on things that affect autistic people, neurodivergent folks, people with disabilities. And I have used this book a lot as far as my own conversation for communicating about autism, helping educate other people as far as why this matters, and also, to my earlier point, showing the breadth and the variety of experiences that autistic people have over the course of their lives with non-speakers, people who are independent, people who are not independent. I think his book does an excellent job of showcasing the very wide array and the wide breadth of experiences that autistic people have.
Thank you for your recommendation, Mr. Shea. How important is it to distinguish between challenges inherent to autism and those arising from co occurring conditions like anxiety, trauma, and many more, often exacerbated by lack of acceptance?
It's funny because a lot of autistic people do have other co-occurring conditions, and so it is often the case that autistic people have one or a few things going on at the same time, which makes every autistic person different, as I said, which means every person's unique challenges and unique strengths with their being autistic are different from person to person. They have different medication, they have different self-regulation strategies, they have different ways in which their disabilities come up or they don't come up. Every individual is different in that regard. So it's hard to have a single one thing to say that this autistic person must behave like this person, even with the same medical background. But instead, there's so much variety and so much complexity that it's hard to pigeonhole people at all and to simplify it much further than that.
How do other identities like race, gender, sexuality, or class uniquely shape the autistic experience and access the resources and diagnosis?
Some of the biggest things that come up is that until recently, a lot of the research, a lot of the academic background on autistic people were done on white men. And I'm a white guy and I recognize that. But I have been really impressed and happy with how much more science and social strategies have been coming out to make the idea about autism much more inclusive and much more based in medicine and in fact for women, for people of different races, people of different gender identities, people from different countries. For the longest time, most of the people getting diagnosed were overwhelmingly white men. And slowly and slowly and slowly, that is starting to change. More women are getting diagnoses, more people of color, more people of different races, different ethnic backgrounds are able to get diagnoses, not just because the science is better, but because the cost is going down over time. Doctors and medical professionals are becoming more aware of how autism appears and what its characteristics are at a medical level in women, in people of color, and people of different races. And above all of that, there's also a better social acceptance, a better social awareness of what it means to be autistic in these different societies, in these different groups. For the longest time, if you were autistic, that could have been seen to some people as a death sentence. You would never live an independent life. And now there are far more organizations, far more strategies, better medicine, better science, and better understanding of how autistic people can find a sense of equilibrium and find a sense of self regulation, whether they have some independence or if they don't.
Again, very well said, Mr. Choi. Very well said. What are the most impactful ways non autistic people can be genuine allies, moving beyond awareness to a meaningful support and systemic change?
Number one thing people can do is be supportive of the autistic people they know in their own lives. I think what comes up often is that not every autistic person, let me start that over. Not everybody knows that they know somebody who's autistic. And some of those autistic people don't even know that they're autistic themselves. That's a really big thing that I found comes up is that
Yes,
often people are like, "Oh, you can't be autistic." When it's like, "Well, no, I actually am." And sometimes the autistic people will recognize things in other people who are autistic and be like, "Wow, that kind of resonates with my experience. Am I maybe autistic? I should go see a professional. I should do some more research and homework." And the biggest advice I can give to people who want to create understanding and want to support folks is just to have meaningful conversations and to create emotionally safe and honest spaces to have dialogue and conversations. That's really where it all starts.
definitely. And Mr. Choi, how you define autistic people?
Can you clarify that question?
Yes, how you define them?
I think it's hard to define autistic people because every autistic person is different. There's such a wide variety of experiences, of strengths, of support needs that defining autistic people by one category is really challenging. What I can say is that autistic people do bring such a wide variety of experiences, of insight, of really full and rich experiences, of very vivid understandings of maybe their own mind, their own state of being. And pushing beyond that, some folks are very articulate about what is going on in their life. What are the things in their world that are dysregulating them, that are causing them some physical pain, that are causing them emotional or cognitive or mental pain. And I think if there was a unifying thread across all autistic people, it's that every person is different. And it's that those triggers are going to vary from person to person. And they all stem from, and they all start from self advocacy and communicating. If every autistic person had what they needed to self advocate and to self communicate and put their needs out there into the world to discuss, then I think the entire world would be a much better place.
Mr. Shea, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and of course my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and of course my food 101 in the fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast, Law 101 and Mental Health 101. Love Letters in third season, Movie 101 Review and Music 101 in its fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcasts. Mr. Shea, what core societal shift like attitudes, policies, or structures are needed to create a world where autistic people can truly thrive as their authentic selves?
I think you nailed them all right there. I think policies and legislator has to get better as far as understanding autistic people and not trying to group them or categorize them too broadly or too generally. I think society and medicine still has a long way to go to create full and much more complete understanding about autistic people. Will we ever achieve full 100% understanding? Probably not. But I think society and science and medicine still has a long way to go to meaningfully close the gap to even get close, in my opinion. And I think people in reality, normal people who aren't decision makers, who aren't scientists, who aren't a part of any of those things, can still do a lot to support autistic people in their lives, to communicate, to advocate for them, to go to bat. If you know somebody who's autistic, go to bat for them. Ask, what can I do to help you? What's going on? Can we have a conversation about it? And they may not get anything out of that conversation, or they may get 20,000 different things that they can do to make autistic people's lives much more fulfilling.
Mr. Shea Belsky, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy, your podcast, or whatever projects that you are doing right now?
Absolutely. You can listen to my podcast, Autistic Techie, anywhere you listen to podcasts. My name is Shea Belsky. You can find me on social media. There's only one person with my name out there. If you search for me on the internet, you will find me.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Shea Blowski because if you support him, more and more and more empowering advocacy to come, more and more empowering episodes for the podcast itself, and more empowering people to come. So, Mr. Shea Blowski, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.